Hey, it's Andrew Jenks, documentary filmmaker. Along with my fellow producers, Dwayne Johnson and Danny Garcia, we created the podcast, What Really Happened. We actually hit #1 on the Apple Podcast charts for season 1, which you can listen to right here or download them wherever you listen to your podcasts. So this show is really only as good as the incredible team I have around me. There's a quote that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. So for me in the past, I've had issues with hiring people for projects because I'll be so focused on the project that somehow hiring becomes a second priority. And that is a big mistake. And it's why I'm really happy that What Really Happened is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. The ZipRecruiter team makes this all really simple and effective. They have an extremely high efficiency rate. 80% of employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site in just one day. Numbers speak for themselves, and essentially ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on the right candidates finding you, it finds them. They got this, what I call Moneyball approach, using its smart matching technology to work, actively notifying qualified candidates about a job within minutes of posting, so you're really getting the best possible matches. Check out today why ZipRecruiter is used by growing businesses of all sizes and all different sorts of industries. You're not just getting immediate results, but you're finding the most qualified job candidates. And right now, my listeners can post jobs on ZipRecruiter for free. So that's right, for free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/WRH. So ZipRecruiter.com/WRH. One more time to try it for free, totally free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/WRH. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Phil is a skinny 6'8" hippie, about 45 years old. He's a recipient of North Dakota's Rough Rider Award, an honor bestowed upon by the governor of the state to prominent North Dakotans. Phil is up late this one night. He isn't in the film business, much less a filmmaker, but he's busy editing clips from The Wizard of Oz. Phil feels good about the edit, heads home, and the next day arrives to work. He walks into the morning meeting that he leads and looks at his coworkers. Most of them are tall, 6'7" on average to be precise. All men, most of them, not all, but most are in incredible shape. They are the 1990 Chicago Bulls, a group led by Michael Jordan. They have just lost 2 straight games in a crucial best-of-7 series. Their coach and amateur editor, Phil Jackson, who would go on to be a Hall of Famer and one of the greatest coaches in the history of basketball, hits the play button.
Oh, we're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. Here he is, the Wizard of Wiz, if ever a Wiz there was. If ever a Wiz there was, the Wizard of Oz is one because.
The 15 or so men aren't sure how to react. They see Joe Dumars, a player on the opposing team, the Detroit Pistons, drive by Michael Jordan for a bucket. Normally, when watching game tape, a coach like Phil would go through the sequences of what had happened and what Jordan or his teammates could have done better. Instead, the video then cuts to a clip of Tin Man, ruminating about life without a heart.
If I ever go looking for my heart's desire again, I won't look any further than my own backyard, because if it isn't there, I never really lost it to begin with. Is that right?
That's all it is.
But that's so easy. I should have thought of it for you. I should have felt it in my heart.
Then a clip of the Bulls' second best player, Scottie Pippen, getting beat by another Pistons player, and a clip of the Scarecrow, wishing he had a brain.
I would not be just a nuffin', head all full of stuffin', my heart all full of pain. I would dance and be merry, life would be a ding-a-dairy if I only had a brain.
This continues. Finally, one of the players speaks up. Phil is telling us that we have no heart, no courage, and no brains. The players don't like this suggestion. Most aren't familiar with the movie, but nonetheless, the point has been made. Phil decided that instead of wagging his finger and lambasting them for lack of play, much less lack of courage, brains, or heart, he would use the power of a movie, or really, the power of a narrative to give his message. You'd be incorrect to think that this is dumbing down to a group of professional athletes, because simplicity doesn't mean dumb. Somebody once told me that there are 2 types of smart people in this world. There are smart people who take simple things and make them sound complicated, and there are smart people who take complicated things and make them sound simple. The latter is oftentimes far more effective. The Bulls team, like many NBA teams at the time, spent a lot of time going to the movies when on the road. They loved a good story. Now, one may assume the leader of the team, Jordan, was in the front row, and after these clips were shown, he stood up and gave a roaring speech to his team. Or perhaps Jordan was in the back, quietly watching, his team knowing that the leader was focused. His action during the game would do the talking. Where Jordan actually was during this moment in time, I have no idea. But Jordan was known to go to the bathroom during Phil Jackson's pregame speeches. It's when he happened to have, and I quote, bowel movements. And in my research of Michael, he, out of anyone, did not need the Wizard of Oz for motivation. Jordan knew the power of a good story. He was, actually, I'd suggest, a bit of a story savant. When Jordan retired, the first time, in 1993, he had changed American culture as we know it. He had carefully crafted his own narrative and thus an entire empire that would eventually make him the third richest African American, only behind Oprah and Robert Smith. He is credited with making going bald acceptable, if not cool. He wore baggy shorts, and the world followed. Even Cuba Gooding Jr. was running around dying for a pair of MJ underwear.
Michael, thanks for the underwear. I'm wearing your underwear!
But stories started to form around why Jordan was really retiring. Many couldn't believe MJ was leaving the game because of...
I've always stressed to people that have known me and the media that has followed me that when I lose the sense of motivation and the sense of to prove something as a basketball player, it's time for me to move away from the game of basketball.
So narratives started to form. Something larger must have been at hand. And in many ways there was. In fact, it wasn't a secret. MJ was under investigation by the NBA for gambling issues. He had owed large sums of money to an assortment of people, mainly criminals. And so people to this day, and I'm not talking conspiracy theorists or even really smart fans, which the NBA has plenty of, but also many respectable basketball journalists, still wonder, was he really being suspended by the NBA? Could it have been a secret suspension? I've often wondered this. I do to this day. As the NBA was becoming a booming worldwide business, did the association ask Jordan to quietly leave the game for some period of time? Maybe let the rumors slowly pass? It kind of makes sense. During his retirement speech, there was one sentence MJ said that has never made sense to me. He references that maybe, as he did in fact do, maybe he would come back to the NBA one day. But he says if he were to, he would do so
5 years down the line, if that urge comes back, if the Bulls have me, if David Stern lets me back in the league, I may come back.
If David Stern, the commissioner of the NBA, lets MJ back in the league? Michael Jordan was the biggest star in the world, responsible for the NBA going global. Why was he saying he'd come back if the commissioner would allow him? Everyone was making more money because of Jordan. Everyone. It must have been a slip on MJ's part. Stern must have said privately, "Go away for a bit, MJ." And MJ agreed. It was a good idea and did so. Hopefully Stern would let him back in the league. I watched and rewatched that press conference when Jordan announces his retirement. Perhaps 100 journalists are hanging on to MJ's every word. His fellow players, coaches, and other members of the team stand nearby him. Most of their faces are somber. It almost plays like a funeral. A reporter notes, as team executives Jordan and his wife sit behind a table in front of all of the reporters, that it looks like, quote-unquote, the Last Supper. Then I see Phil Jackson, our tall, hippie, and amateur editor. I pause the video and sort of zoom my eyes in on him. Jackson has a grin on his face. While everyone else seems lost and in despair, or are pretending to smile as if happy for Jordan, only Jackson holds a sincere grin. What could he be thinking? This coach who helped MJ understand the value of a team, and MJ who in turn made Phil a famous coach, was now watching the greatest player of all time leave the game. MJ wanted something else, or so he said. something in the distance. Unless, of course, he was being forced to. So I ask, what really happened? Michael Jordan had played in the NBA for 7 years, hadn't won a championship, and was already considered the most famous athlete in the world. Some think of Jordan's fame growing in the early to mid-90s, but Michael was already considered the most famous athlete on the planet. So when he won his first championship in 1991, the accolades came pouring in. Said Sports Illustrated, at the relatively tender age of 28, Michael stands alone on the mountaintop, unquestionably the most famous athlete on the planet and one of its most famous citizens of any kind. We've heard it so often that it's now a cliche, though an accurate one. He transcends sports. Said another publication, Jordan is almost certainly more popular than Jesus. And when a reporter told Jordan that he was this perfect human being, a person that all children of the world should emulate, what was his response? Well, it was perfect, of course. I tell kids the first lesson, don't be like me. Be better than me. That's the goal. Jordan was keenly aware of his brand and ensured that it was pristine. When in his early 20s, a reporter came to chronicle Jordan at his house. MJ opened the door and said he was busy ironing. The reporter had a tough time believing that this wasn't MJ showing how down-to-earth he was. Then Jordan got a phone call. On the other line was the most beloved coach in the world, Dean Smith, Jordan's former college coach. Again, the reporter found this awfully fortuitous. Jordan cared a lot about his image, and it certainly seemed to work. He somehow got away with once telling Maria Shriver in the late 80s that, quote, even my mistakes have been perfect. When asked what his greatest fear was, a reporter was thinking his answer would be a cliche family story. But nope, not Jordan. He said it would be people seeing him as a vile figure and losing his cachet with the public. Apparently, it was a reoccurring nightmare that he had. And then, something happened. A book was released. Meet Sam Smith, the man who, in some ways, made that nightmare a reality. Perhaps the only person bigger than MJ in this story is Sam. Although he's probably a foot smaller than MJ, Sam has been a writer covering the Bulls for almost his entire professional career. Similar to Jordan, he's balding but has never shaved it all off. He sports a mustache and is probably a foot smaller than MJ. At the time most of this story happens, Sam is in his early 40s. But to understand the book that Sam writes, titled The Jordan Rules, it's important to understand Sam's background. Sam doesn't have what I would consider your normal backstory for a sports journalist.
Initially I was a political writer and then an investigative reporter. There's very strict rules in journalism, which the notion in journalism, newspaper journalism, was you're supposed to write to a sixth grade level because then everybody could understand it. So there was sort of this unnatural dumbing down of what you had to do, try to be simple, short sentences. I worked sort of wire service when I started. And so there were a lot of limitations on developing a personality and a voice. The reporting was easy. You just came in and you talked to people and you asked them things. And it's a form of natural curiosity. Everybody wants to know. You just have to have the nerve to stand up and ask people things.
And that's something that I thought was really interesting in terms of your own background, that you had worked for, I think, the Regional Wire Service States News in D.C.
Right. It was a valuable lesson that I learned that, you're responsible for, not only your actions, but your actions can have significant ramifications on the lives of others. So you better be accurate about what you do, and then you can't run away from it. You have to stay there.
Sam tells me that he's often compared to Larry David. Larry David is from Brooklyn, as is Sam Smith. In fact, so is Michael Jordan. When I made the comparison, which I thought was interesting, that both Sam and Jordan are from Brooklyn, Sam's response was, well, kind of classic. You guys are both Brooklyn guys.
You're right. We didn't consider him a Brooklyn guy.
Sam, I think, is alluding to the fact that Jordan, although born in Brooklyn, really grew up in North Carolina, where his family moved when Jordan was 18 months old. So Jordan isn't really a Brooklyn guy. Sam is true Brooklyn. And Sam knows, and I think this really matters, that this Brooklyn edge made a big difference in his coverage of Jordan.
Which is sort of a Eastern trait in a lot of respects. It gets translated into trash talk these days and whatever.
He continued,
He didn't like, even though he liked being famous, everybody likes being famous, he didn't like the sort of suck-up kind of media. He liked you to challenge him. And I sort of enjoyed that, too. So I would pick on his mistakes. You know, we was shooting badly or whatever. I would make a joke about it and gave him an opportunity to come back at you. And he sort of always proved over the years that, you know, he came to respect the players after he tested them and they responded.
There's a famous story that during a practice, one of Jordan's teammates, Steve Kerr, was getting away with fouling MJ. Jordan had enough and punched Kerr straight in the face. Jordan was kicked out of practice. Kerr had a very visible black eye, but the next day, Kerr didn't feel bad for himself or was even angry at Jordan. And from that day forward, Jordan said he respected Kerr. There are endless stories like this. If Jordan challenges you, oftentimes to a point that most would consider disrespectful and really unforgivable, but you press forward or continue to challenge him back, well, then Jordan maybe doesn't become your best friend, but he respects you. When Jordan's friends weren't with him on the road, he spent some time with Sam Smith and the late beat writer Lacey Banks.
You know, would sit with them, just play cards or talk. You'd play golf with them once and been out to dinner lunch a couple of times, that kind of thing. But not exceptionally close, but work relation.
And all before the book comes out. When the book comes out, their relationship changes, and not in a good way. The Bulls have just finally won a championship. Jordan is being literally compared to Jesus, and Smith's book seems to suddenly change that narrative. He makes Jordan, dare I say it, sound like a person. First, the book really shows what life is like for a basketball team over the course of a season. The small details of how certain friendships prosper while others deteriorate. Why Phil Jackson would sometimes have the team take a bus opposed to a charter plane so that his team could see the country, and whether or not this was effective. I calculated how many times the word belief or think is mentioned in the book, and it's about once per page, demonstrating how much basketball is about one's opinion of themselves and the perception of others. More than all of the above, as Sam tells us the story of the 1990-91 Bulls team, he introduces us to each player, providing insight into their world, where each player comes from, their strengths and weaknesses, not just as players, but as people. Ultimately, he paints the portrait of what a team looks like. The book, though, also tells other stories, like when Jordan, Pippen, and Horace Grant get in a friendly debate about which of their kids has a bigger penis, how Jordan would purposely throw the ball at a player's head, knowing he wouldn't catch it, all in order to show how much the player needed to work on his game, or perhaps to show why Jordan would never do it in a game. Mike Imram, a beloved sports journalist with the Chicago Daily Herald, said this about Jordan.
Put it in the context of what Jordan was like around here. You know, he was, I don't want to say he was a religion, but he was a religious figure. I mean, people just loved the guy. He cultivated an incredible image. So he was sort of like an untouchable. You know, he received very little criticism to that point. You didn't criticize or put Michael Jordan in an unflattering light. He was just above that.
Imram added,
I criticized him one time. I can't remember exactly the time frame. I said something negative about him in a column, and a woman calls me to defend him, and ask me how I could possibly say that about Michael.
Oh, wow.
Well, in the course of the conversation, she revealed that she was waiting to have an organ transplant. And here she was worried about Michael, how Michael was being treated. I mean, it just blew my doors off.
Smith also says the unthinkable, that Jordan, quote, often backed away from the traditional leadership role, and, quote, and he rarely spoke with his teammates, other than to taunt them with his rapier wit. And this wit, Jordan's ability to trash talk or come up with clever one-liners at any given moment, certainly comes across. When a player gathered tickets for his family and friends to come to a game, MJ asked the player why he was even bothering. His friends and family could see the guy at home sitting on the couch. It was the same thing. When Jordan dunked on Hall of Famer and Utah Jazz guard John Stockton, 5 inches smaller than Jordan, the owner of the Jazz yelled at MJ to pick on somebody his own size. A few plays later, Jordan dunked on 7-foot center Mel Turpin and yelled back, "Is he big enough for you?" It's been said that Jordan trash-talked so poetically that it led to Rodney McKay and Muggsy Bogues losing confidence in their own game and never recovering, unable to make an NBA team again. But Sam didn't mind Jordan talking smack, including when he went at reporters.
Yeah, he'd be great on Twitter.
He would be great on Twitter. The book showcases Jordan's love for a challenge to give him extra motivation. When one player said he thought Jordan couldn't make a free throw with his eyes closed, Jordan did just that. There are also several examples of players saying before a game that they'd shut Jordan down, only for MJ to go on and have career highs against that player. Not just in that game the player was referencing, but for the rest of that player's career. Years later, there'd be a famous story about Jeff Van Gundy, the coach of the New York Knicks, saying before a game that Jordan was a con artist of sorts. He'd buddy up with Knicks players in order to crush them once it was game time. Jordan didn't care for this opinion and scored 51 points, staring down Van Gundy at one point in the game. Van Gundy, a very successful coach in his own right, with an incredible basketball mind, and now the lead commentator for NBA games, told me, as I spoke with him while he was driving in his car, that he wouldn't entertain the thought of Jordan retiring for any reasons other than what he said.
I think we used to really love the game, and now we love the drama within the game. Like, we love trade rumors. You know, we spend probably 90% of our time talking about drama and rumors than the beauty of the game.
And then my favorite part of this interview, maybe this whole podcast.
And we love, hold on, I can't drive past the lemonade stand without buying. Hold on. Is that lemonade? Or, okay, you know what? My daughter's coming back. She'll pick something out. All right. Sorry.
No, please. That was amazing. I push a bit and bring up that Jordan was a known gambler and loved extra motivation. And the game in which Jordan took Van Gundy's comments personal, Jeff points out that the Knicks lost the game by only 1 point.
The narrative becomes that he was always looking for ways to use something as motivation. And then if they had made one less basket, then I'm a master motivator because I challenged the iconic one. So a lot of it is how the media writes it. And most times I think they're simplistic in their evaluations of situations. And in this one, you know, Jordan was great whether he was challenged or not challenged, whether he was slighted or not slighted. The idea that, you know, he needed some external motivation would go in direct contrast to being a great player, because the truly all-time greats are self-motivated. They don't need anybody or anything to get them ready to play. And so, again, I know everybody repeats it like it's true, but I don't think it's true.
Regardless, people were pissed about the book. It was sacrilegious. Stacey King, a teammate of Jordan, said, quote, "I think this is going to be one of the best fictional stories since Mother Goose. It's sick." Even Sam's fellow journalists took aim at his book. The Sun-Times' Jay Mariotti claimed he'd read some portion of the Jordan Rules, which Smith does doubt, and wrote that it, quote, might become one of the most damaging books ever written about a sports team. Word got to Jordan. this book wasn't going to make him look all that good.
I understood he wasn't happy about it, and I understood why, because it was promoted as in excerpts. And
so what does Jordan think the book ultimately says about him?
He's a dick. and he's not, but overall, and a lot of the things that led up to that were sort of understandable reactions to circumstance. But as we know, context is not a great attribute of American journalism.
And so, with most reacting to only the excerpts, Sam suddenly becomes a part of the story.
And the narrative becomes, Sam Smith and the Jordan Rules is going to destroy this team.
Yeah.
Like, they won a title, and they finally succeeded, and now here's this guy to make personal wealth. He's going to ruin all your dreams.
Sam himself has to essentially go into hiding. His newspaper tells Sam to stay at home for about a week. At the mall, Sam would overhear people saying that if they ever met that author of the Jordan Rules, they'd beat the daylights out of him. And his relationship with Jordan?
So I realized, look, no more bantering. We're not. You realize what's appropriate. And so I just stopped speaking to him conversationally or informally, but I was still there working, and I had to talk to him, and there was no reason to be cowed or to be intimidated. I wasn't embarrassed about anything I'd written, and I thought it was fair. I didn't think it was inappropriate, and I didn't think it depicted him terribly poorly. The excerpts always do, but everything in context I felt was positive for the most part. Because I did like him and I did respect him.
With Sam's background, he didn't hide from MJ. In fact, quite the opposite.
So when I wrote the Jordan Rules, it became, somewhat to my surprise, such a sort of a bombshell situation, I went to Jordan at first chance I could and went up to him and said, I'm here. If you got any problems, let me know. And, it was my point of saying I stand behind this. I didn't have to say it somewhere. Newspapers always say we stand behind our story. I stood in front of it. And I think that's an important trait for anybody who works in this business to do. So I was taken aback at, and probably naive of me, but partially because I had done serious, not just, more serious work. I had done investigative things where people were threatened with jail and, things like that. And I'd gotten once assaulted by somebody I had written about. I'd been in court and, I filed an assault case and was testifying in court about being beaten up.
Despite the claims that Sam's book would be the downfall of Jordan and that the team would never recover, they in fact did just fine. They won 2 more championships, and Jordan also won a gold medal, leading the 1992 U.S. men's Olympic basketball team, a squad that many consider the greatest team of all time, the Dream Team. And then, on October 6th, 1993, MJ announces he's retiring. Why?
I've always stressed to people that have known me and the media that has followed me that when I lose the sense of motivation and the sense of to prove something as a basketball player, it's time for me to move away from the game of basketball. It's not because I don't love the game. I love the game of basketball, I always will. I just feel that at this particular time in my career, I've reached the pinnacle of my career. I've achieved a lot in that short amount of time, if you want to call it short. But I just feel that I don't have anything else for myself to prove.
This seemed like such a simple reason. Because he had nothing else to prove? So, what did he have to prove after one championship? Why not retire then? So I obviously love storytelling, and it makes a world of difference to understand as much as possible for whatever subject we're discussing on the podcast. And I oftentimes go to Skillshare, which is almost like a Netflix for online learning. I've watched classes on everything from data storytelling to Alfred Hitchcock to DSLR photography, you name it. It's unbelievable. Skillshare classes are taught by industry experts and experienced professionals. It's the real deal. So it's perfect if you're looking to build a new career or start the side hustle of your dream, or like I do, just learning more and researching for projects. There are endless classes. Some include design, photography, marketing, entrepreneurship, to watercoloring and calligraphy. So Skillshare, and this is what I'm most excited about, is giving my listeners, a 1-month free trial of unlimited access to over 17,000 classes. If you go to Skillshare.com/WRH, you can start your free month trial today. That's Skillshare.com/WRH. So I was in Los Angeles, and I was meeting with a Celtics fan, which is bizarre because I'm not the biggest LA guy, and I can't stand the Celtics. Go Knicks. Yeah, I said it. But this guy's also a great documentary filmmaker, and we were talking about moving from documentary filmmaking to documentary podcasts. It's interesting because you no longer have any sort of visual that you're working with. This guy's name is Gotham Chopra, and you probably know him, and I really love his new podcast, Why Sports Matter. Like our show, it really dives into larger stories that we so often overlook. So at the end of today's episode of What Really Happened, we're going to play a portion of Why Sports Matter about Sadie in the Woods, only because I really think it gets you thinking and it's worth your time, which, trust me, I know is valuable. Back to the show. People start to wonder if Jordan's retirement is really that secret suspension. In other words, he and David Stern, the commissioner of the NBA, agree that Jordan should take time off. Why? Well, Jordan's penchant for gambling had become a part of his image, his narrative. In an interview with Connie Chung, he's asked repeatedly if he's addicted to gambling. Some would suggest that this line of questioning, this idea that he wasn't perfect, started with Sam's book. And they are probably right, to a large extent. A lot of the gambling rumors start about a year before Jordan retires. There are at least 4 major stories that come out. On October 11th, 1992, MJ is ordered to testify about a $57,000 check he sends to James Slim Buhler, a convicted cocaine dealer and really a drug mule for a drug kingpin. Jordan first says the $57K was a loan, but under oath, he says it was to pay off a gambling debt. So that's red flag number 1. Then the murder of Eddie Dow, who controlled dilapidated office buildings, seedy nightclubs, and whose biggest line of business was as a bail bondsman, putting up cash to free accused criminals. Dow is murdered, and police look through his briefcase, and they find 3 checks totaling $108,000. All 3 are from Jordan. A few months later, in May 1993, the New York Times reports that MJ gambled in Atlantic City, late into the night before a pivotal playoff game against the Knicks. And then finally, the 4th story comes out on June 6, 1993. Richard Aquinas, a golfing companion of Jordan's, says that Jordan owed him over $1 million, but Jordan wasn't paying. According to Richard, MJ evaded calls and letters to pay. Eventually, MJ agreed to pay $300,000, but, and again, this is all according to Aquinas, Jordan would pay in installments because MJ's wife started to notice large sums of money were missing. The same month, the NBA says they are investigating Jordan and his gambling issues. And this can't be overemphasized. Jordan is the game's biggest star, arguably the most famous person on the planet, and the league in which he plays for is investigating him. And then, as if things couldn't get any worse, James Jordan, Michael's father, is murdered. Most don't know this, but James Jordan, who I'll refer to as James for the sake of clarity, was driving home to Charlotte from a funeral. He was driving in a Lexus. 2 men, Daniel Green and Larry Demery, had planned to rob a tourist at a roadside motel and were unsuccessful. They saw the Lexus nearby and were apparently going to tie up James, rob the car, and leave him alongside the road. But when James woke up, Green shot James in the chest, and the 2 dumped James's body in a swamp. Both were given life sentences. Did MJ, who would go on to say he regretted betting with quote-unquote goons, owe money to the wrong people, and as retribution, Daniel Green and Larry Demery were ordered to kill James Jordan as payback? This is a hefty, awful charge to make, and one not to bring up without a sensitive, real conversation. So I got in contact with Bob Bryan, to ask about Jordan's gambling and the theories around his potential silent suspension, and if it had anything to do with James Jordan's death. I give a lot of credit to Bob for being open to talking about this, as if he needs any credit from me. Bob is arguably one of, if not the best sports journalist of all time. He's won National Sports Writer of the Year 4 times, covered at least 20 NBA Finals, 20 Final Fours, the last 7 Olympics, and pretty much all of the biggest sporting events in the last 30 years. Bill Simmons says that Bob Bryant is simply, quote, the best basketball writer ever. When I reached out to other reporters, they didn't want to talk about this because they were afraid of any fallback. And I'm talking about seasoned journalists who have been around for a long time, but Bob was willing. Above all else, I think I should preface with Bob saying some version of the following several times in our conversation.
Let's be very specific with the language here.
And again, make no mistake, this is sensitive. What does Bob make of any ties between MJ's gambling and his father's death?
We know that there's another alternate theory, and it remains a theory, and it will never be proven. Because in order for it to be proven, party of the second part has to dish, and I don't think he ever will.
Ryan is referring to David Stern, again, the commissioner of the NBA at the time, who would have to meet with Jordan privately and suggest that he retire.
The undercurrent theory is that David Stern forced him out and to lay low for a while, and that Michael's gambling was an issue, and that somewhere in here, and I don't know the chronology, his father was murdered, and one of the whispers that's been hanging out there is this was a retaliation because Michael doesn't pay up, and it's known that Michael was well known for not paying up his golfing debts. And do I believe it? I don't know. Do I think it is conceivable? And let's be very specific with the language here. Mm-hmm. Do I think it is conceivable? Yes, it's conceivable. Do I think it is? Do I know? I don't. Am I interested personally in pursuing that narrative? No. I'll let it hang out there, and they want to. If the original story is fiction, that's okay with me, because the other one is just really too gruesome to contemplate, quite frankly.
Bob continued.
The person who paid the price was his father. That's pretty reprehensible. Once again, I am not saying that I believe it or endorse it. I am simply saying that I would not rule it out as a conceivable occurrence. I can't, because of obviously his predilection for gambling is very extreme.
And what Bob ultimately suggests that I do is luckily what I already was working on.
I'd love to know what Sam Smith knows.
About Sam Smith, the legendary Bob Ryan says,
one of the most knowledgeable and I think respected people who covered the NBA in over a period of 30 years, and one of the handful of most prominent NBA writers ever. You must have talked to him.
So I asked Sam quite a few questions on this charge of a secret suspension and any ties that Jordan may have had to his father's own death. And remember how Sam began his career as an investigative reporter. Remember, he literally wrote the book that gave a more accurate portrayal of who Jordan really was. So I started by asking Sam about the NBA's investigation into Jordan's gambling issues.
Yeah, it was complete bullshit.
Okay.
There was no investigation. Got to remember that the NBA is a business first. Morality is a subsidiary of all that. It's nice to have, but it's about, not to compare them with the mafia, but it's business. It's just business. That's what it is.
But then why have an investigation? Why say you are looking into the greatest player of all time, the man making everyone millions, billions of dollars?
There's this public outcry, or media outcry, really. It wasn't a public outcry, media outcry. Jordan was gambling with a felon, and you got to investigate this, and the sort of media's high horse about that. So the NBA is under continued pressure that, hey, they got to do something about this. So they say, we're going to investigate. Well, they don't investigate.
Sam's newspaper decides that they should investigate. And so they ask those that were a part of Jordan's gambling circle what the NBA was asking them in their investigation. The answer?
Well, what the NBA investigators asked you. No, they didn't talk to any of them. Nobody from the NBA asked the main guy anything. So it was just for show because the public was on their backs. They had to have a PR answer. Yeah, we're investigating.
But the media, which, according to Sam, forced the NBA's hand in starting an investigation in the first place, is now going berserk that there is now an actual investigation. Sam believes how the media covered Jordan's gambling may have played a role in Jordan's retirement, which is very different than Jordan's gambling playing a role in his retirement. Sam talks about what he considers an overblown New York Times article in which the Times can't believe that Jordan was up late one night playing cards.
You know, New York Times was horrified and wrote a story saying, how could he do that? You know, he's out gambling in Atlantic City the night before a game. It was moronic. So anyway,
and that he does this all the time.
Accumulation of things.
Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't take much research to see that Jordan didn't sleep much. Bob Greene, who wrote the classic book Hang Time, Dazed and Dreams with Michael Jordan, once said, quote, "If you're in a room with Jordan, he's going to get up, he's going to pace, he's going to look out the window. This is a guy who can't sit still." Magic Johnson talked about spending time with Jordan when they were on the 1992 Dream Team. Quote, "We're hanging together at the Olympics, playing cards every night until it's 6 o'clock. The light is coming up. He goes and gets an hour of sleep," this is Jordan, "gets up, makes the 8 o'clock tee time, plays 18 holes of golf, comes back, scores 20 points in the first half of our game. We go back to the hotel. Guess what we do? Play cards all night again. The third night comes around and I'm sleepwalking now because I got to get some rest." Michael badgered the guys about continuing until finally a teammate spoke up. "Michael, we're just not like you." According to Smith, despite Jordan's endless energy, the media was relentless in their coverage of the investigation, and this got to him. Sam points out,
That really contributed a lot to him leaving, you know, that he was of a mind like, hey, I couldn't have been more decent to all these guys in the media for a decade, and they're killing me now. What is this about? You know, he was really pissed.
I watched the press conference a few times over when Jordan announces his retirement, and the one group that he continues to bring up isn't his own teammates, family, or fans, but instead the media. He won't stop taking jabs at them.
And it wasn't like everyone had speculated about all the different media pressure and different pressures that I was feeling. I deal with pressure all the time, and I've always said that I would never let you guys run me out the game. So don't think that you've done that. A lot of times you guys do all the pushing. Hopefully I don't see too many of you guys in the future. And that was one of the reasons that I stepped away from the game, because when I stepped on the basketball court, there wasn't anything else for me to prove. That's one of the reasons you guys have gone into my private life, because you can't blame my basketball. You know, as long as you guys stay away from my house, I can have peace and quiet. I would never do you guys' job, because you don't have sympathy for normal people sometimes. And I think I like to give myself a little bit more credit to have sympathy for other people. Yeah, I heard you last night. You took it the wrong way. I don't appreciate what you said. I should have expected that question from you. I expected it because I am in touch with my feelings about the game, about my skills to the game. I've always been in tune to what's right for me as a player and as a person. And if I can be a friendship to any of the players and help them through some trying times with the media, I'm willing to pass my advice to them. And that's not to talk to you. I've just been fortunate that I can make that choice now, instead of one of you guys pushing me out and saying I'm old and, you know, it's time for me to move on.
He even ends the press conference with
walking away from you guys in a few minutes. That would be a good step.
And then, of course, in a classic Jordan move, when a reporter, obviously aware of Jordan's opinion on the media, asks if he doesn't respect the media, MJ rises above it all.
I've always respected the media. I will continue to respect some of you. You guys have a job just like I have a job, and I've always respected that. And sometimes you've gotten on my nerves, and sometimes I've omitted it, and sometimes I have admitted it. So I've always tried to keep a good, clean relationship with you guys, and I don't think I have any bitterness towards you guys as I walk away from the game. I'm not a hatred type of person. I don't carry no grudges, or, when I'm walking away with a clean slate. And I wish you guys well in your careers as reporters.
MJ remains aware of his image. He doesn't want anyone to think he's bitter. His endless critique of the media during this press conference could be interpreted two different ways. He either felt the need to keep bringing them up because he truly despised them, or they in fact did push him out of the game. But he was dead set on not letting anyone think that this was the case. Nobody pushes Jordan out of anything, much less basketball. So did the media in fact drive him out? No. Sam Smith thinks maybe to some extent, but Sam, as always, keeps Jordan's story in context.
That is a lot of other factors. You know, this guy played. Nobody plays like now that like this guy played. He never missed games for years, and he didn't come out of games. He was playing 40 minutes. You know, he was averaging more than anybody plays now. He throws himself into things with such manic intensity that he is subject to burnout, and he's wearing out. You know, he's had to carry that team.
And it wasn't just the regular season. Even in preseason games, when MJ was told he didn't have to play,
Jordan understood, partially because of the image, that, and he would say that. I remember, you know, we'd be in these remote places in Nebraska or wherever, and they'd say, "Well, you don't have to play today." He said, "Well, you know, they're never going to see me. You know, I'm never going to be here. I got to come." And he plays like 35 minutes in the preseason game, and he's dunking, and he pushed himself.
And then, as if all of this wasn't enough,
and so now, and then his father gets murdered in the summer, and they were really close. You know, I watched seeing his father a lot, and it helped inspire me, you know, with my own son. You know, I admired that relationship. You know, they were friends more than father-son even, and did a lot together and just hung out together and had this easy manner between them, you know, and then to lose them like that, I think it really, like, I just think he hit a wall. Like, you know what, I got to get away from this. And you know, that's why I think baseball, because I remember him and the father talking about baseball years before that, 89 and 90.
Smith reports that Jordan had gone to the Bulls owner, who also owned one of Chicago's two baseball teams, the Chicago White Sox, and asked if he could play in the summer for the minor league team. That's just how much of a competitor Jordan is. As Smith said, manic.
So, you know, I think that was his own way, as like a tribute to his father.
Now, can you imagine? Your dad dies, you're thinking of going to play baseball in honor of him, which is what Jordan ended up doing, and others are thinking that you may have had something to do with your father's death. After researching more on the trial of James Jordan, there are two men charged and convicted, Daniel Green and Larry Demery. Larry Demery signed a plea agreement, became the state's key witness, and identified Green as the killer. Demery was there, but says he didn't actually pull the trigger. Daniel Green's lawyers say that Demery shot James Jordan by himself, then drove to a nearby backyard cookout to get Green. Both were sentenced to life in prison with parole. Demery, who again made a deal with the state, is up for parole consideration this year. Green, now 41, was given an additional 10 years for conspiracy. But in 1998, 5 years after the murder, Green does an interview with Mark Roberts of WRAL-TV, a local news channel in North Carolina. Green said, quote, "I did not kill Mr. Jordan, no sir. I did not kill him. That's cut and dry. It's not like I was even there when he was killed." Green is then asked how he feels about Larry Demery saying Green did it. Green responds with, quote, "I feel that both of us are pawns in a game," unquote. In only the last couple of years, there's been an alarming amount of new evidence and reports that suggests there should be a retrial. The Charlotte Observer, the Fayetteville Observer, other North Carolina outlets, and the Associated Press have reported thoroughly on this case. It can't be summed up easily, but I found 5 main takeaways. 1, a sworn statement from the trial's former jury forewoman admits to doing her own investigation of the murder, which included her going to the swamp in which James Jordan was found dead, and developing her own theory. That alone violates the judge's orders. 2, An affidavit says Robeson County District Attorney Johnson Britt intentionally exaggerated blood findings during the trial and withheld the results of 4 inconclusive tests. Jennifer Elwell, a veteran serologist, says she was ordered by a supervisor to destroy the only known sample of Jordan's blood shortly after the trial. The documents quote Elwell saying that in more than 20 years with the state, she had never been asked to dispose of blood evidence from a murder trial before. 3. An affidavit from a former Robeson County newspaper editor who says Demery told her he killed Jordan after the victim witnessed a drug transaction. The editor says she never reported the confession in her paper, nor told anyone about it. 4. James Jordan's shirt, which had 1 bullet hole through it and used as evidence, has, as one paper called it, quote, an unusual chain of custody. According to the defense's filing, the man who performed the autopsy gave the shirt to a law enforcement officer who gave it to a civilian employee of a company that provided services for funeral homes. This employee gave the shirt to his boss, who said he buried it in his backyard because of the smell. Then, when law enforcement later determined that the shirt was evidence, officials exhumed the shirt. And it was then that a North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation agent reported the presence of a bullet hole in the upper right chest area of the shirt. And last, 5, the defense alleges that the DA and the Robeson County Sheriff's Department conspired to hide a secret from the jury. They allege that the Sheriff Hubert Stone, whose office helped run the Jordan investigation, had an out-of-wedlock son who was a known cocaine dealer and the first person called on James Jordan's car phone in the aftermath of the murder. Green's defense team believes Demery, who knew the dealer, made that call. The judge at Green's trial blocked jurors from hearing about that relationship between the sheriff and the drug trafficker, who defense documents claim was also friends with many of Stone's deputies. Green's lawyers contend the connections could challenge the credibility of Demery, Stone, and his deputies, and, quote, the entire Jordan investigation. All of that information is important because, while it shows reasons for a mistrial, there simply aren't any ties between Michael Jordan's gambling and the murder of his father. Yes, it's easy to make the connection, but after studying the facts, it'd be grossly inaccurate to say there is a connection. But what about Jordan's gambling and the notion of this secret suspension? Sam believes that it is a terrible conspiracy theory, which in the small community that is the NBA would have been unraveled by now. But I pushed a little bit further. Jordan is known to gamble. That's a fact.
Yeah, right.
And then he's also known for his intense competitiveness. You put it a great way in the book, where it's overwhelming competitive drive that was a disease as much as a gift. And, he has these great one-liners back at, Stacey King when he's holding the box. I hope there's a shot in there, these sorts of things. And at some point, at some point, do you hear him placing a bet during a game?
Oh, never. No. He was a pure competitor. He didn't need to gamble, to get up for a game. He liked it, but he valued the game. He was pure about the game. I mean, he loved to compete.
I guess what I mean is
because the game drove him. I mean, he would gamble on, on things in practice. Could you make this shot? I can hit this from sitting. Stuff like that.
Okay. Because I guess I was thinking, like, if someone says, $100 you can't dunk on the next play, that inevitably Jordan, if Larry Miller if the Jazz owner is saying pick on someone your own size, or someone says $100 you can't do this, it's like, how would Jordan not say, watch me go do this for $100, or whatever it'd be?
Right, but it's not about the $100 for him. It would just be about the challenge.
Right.
You don't need to say $100 or $1,000 or $1 million. He would do it. All you had to say to him was that, I know you can't do that. You're not good enough.
Right.
That was all that would drive him. Because it was the personal challenge more than anything. The gambling stuff was just entertainment. Like if you're not playing in the game, you need other things to entertain you. But the gamblings were supplement to the game. If you had the game all the time, you'd never need the gambling. That's why he plays so much golf too. He has to have a method of competition.
And what about the notion of this secret suspension because of Jordan's ties to criminals?
It's a gamble. A lot of times you're going to be with people who are not nice people. And so, that's what happened. He wasn't, they weren't his buddies. He just got, introduced. This one knows this one. And so it was probably mostly an embarrassing situation.
As for the NBA's investigation into Jordan's gambling,
NBA Commissioner David Stern says the league's investigation into Michael Jordan's gambling activities is closed, and there's absolutely no evidence Jordan violated any league rules.
This was announced the day after Jordan's retirement. As Sam indicated, it's hard to believe the NBA took this that seriously. So at this point, I thought there was one question left. It's a question that I had never heard Sam been asked before, and something that I'd never seen him write about. In speaking with him afterwards, he confirms he doesn't recall ever talking about this. And that is, why did MJ say he would make a comeback if Mr. Stern would allow him? That doesn't make sense. How does that not indicate Stern was secretly suspending him? Yes, Sam puts together very convincing, layered reasons for why MJ retired, but to me, that one line shows that something between Stern and Jordan was off. As a reminder, here it is.
If David Stern lets me back in the league, I may come back.
And so I asked, why would Jordan say that?
Knowing Michael, it made complete sense because it was like a side comment to Stern. Like, you're doing this bullshit gambling investigation when you know nothing is there. And you're doing it just for the media, just to satisfy them. So it's like, to me, it was a side statement to Stern. Like, this is bullshit. I know this is bullshit. And so I took it as Michael's way of, giving the needle to Stern. Where he knows Stern's got to do this for the media and the public, but he knows Stern knows that there's nothing to it. But you too, David, you're hanging me out there for no reason. So it was like sort of a little side shot.
That's incredible. So classic Jordan, if anything, really. Somehow finds a way to give you a jab.
Right. It fits exactly with the way, and that was the way Michael did. I heard that over the years that he would say things like that, and you could tell who was aimed at.
As Sam talks, I'm reminded of his reporting. All of the times Jordan had those incredible one-liners or jabs at enemies and friends alike. I'm also reminded of how many times things are taken out of context. In fact, one of Jordan's most well-known lines, and you can Google it and you'll see it comes up a million times, is when he was quoted as saying, "Republicans buy sneakers too." This line will often lead people to tell more and more stories about Jordan putting brand above anything else. Like the time when the Dream Team won the gold medal, and they were sponsored by Reebok, with the Reebok logo placed on the top right of their jersey. MJ, when accepting the gold medal, draped the American flag over his right shoulder so that there wouldn't be a picture of him being sponsored by Nike wearing a Reebok jersey when accepting the gold medal. However, when I've read about this story while researching, I've noticed that people oftentimes don't mention that both Charles Barkley and Magic Johnson did the same exact thing. And in terms of Jordan's famous "Republicans buy sneakers too" line, well, he said that to Sam Smith. And what did Sam Smith reveal? He had been urging MJ to get involved in North Carolina politics. And Michael, who, as Sam says, was always quick and clever and first to win a word race, shot back that Republicans buy sneakers also. Yes, some of these anecdotes do add up, but in this case, with David Stern...
And it was sort of like a sarcastic, I'll be back if David thinks it's okay, that kind of thing.
This was simply MJ letting the commissioner know that the investigation was crap. Last, Sam provides some context and reminds me that the NBA wasn't exactly in perfect shape when MJ retired. There weren't any stars truly ready for prime time.
When Jordan left, you could see what was left of the NBA. It was the worst. It was the most fallow period maybe in their history. So they know themselves that this guy by himself, he's like Samson holding up the temple. If he lets go, the whole thing might fall in on us. They know that.
So
because they know what the other teams are and who their main players are.
MJ was, for a long time, perceived as the perfect person. And Sam Smith was the first person to reveal that he wasn't. People believed, and still do to some extent, that Smith was responsible for Jordan's downfall. The basketball world, and particularly Chicago at the time, wanted Smith gone. There's a saying that a story is happy or sad depending on when you want to end it. Maybe that's why Phil Jackson was the only one grinning during Jordan's first retirement. Maybe he had the foresight to know that MJ may come back, as he did, and lead the Bulls to more championships. Perhaps it was only Phil, the Zen master himself and amateur editor, that knew Jordan needed a break. And as the story comes to a conclusion, it's Sam Smith who has tremendous admiration for Jordan. That MJ's relationship inspired Sam's relationship with his own son. That despite Sam's book, Jordan always treated Sam with respect. And that the most hurtful charge, that MJ was suspended from the league, is nothing but a ridiculous conspiracy theory. Or as Sam Smith would more succinctly say, total bullshit. Sam's relationship with Michael Jordan changed when those excerpts of the book came out. They never went out to lunch or dinner again, never played another round of golf or a game of cards. And Sam doesn't blame Michael. Because if you read the Jordan rules before the story ends, any reasonable human being would be pissed. As my interview with Sam was wrapping up, he asked a question I've never gotten before. At least one I've never gotten before when an interview was wrapping up.
Yeah, I don't quite understand. Is this just an interview, or are you recording this, or what are you doing? I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I don't care what you do with it.
I wanted to ask Sam, was he kidding? I told him ahead of time, obviously, we were recording, and I double-checked just to make sure. I explained what the podcast was. At first, I was confused, and it got me thinking. Why did he just talk for an hour when he says himself he doesn't even understand what it's for? It didn't take long for me to form an opinion. Sam really respects Jordan, and Sam knows the truth. And he's from Brooklyn. And when you have that sort of combination, you find someone that is comfortable and proud of their work, especially after so many people called it blasphemy. Our parting words: Sam apologized for talking for so long.
Yeah, you've heard me talk too much already. Sorry about that.
No, I said. Thank you, Sam. Thank you for coming as close as anyone else has to ending possibly one of the biggest conspiracy theories in sports history by sticking to the facts. And thank you for writing the Jordan rules, for telling the stories of those players peppered in throughout the book, allowing us to see them as humans. Yes, it most certainly has gossip, but anyone who reads it knows that the book tells the story of how Michael Jordan went from being one of the greatest to the greatest, and that it all happened because he valued the concept of a team. Could there be a more important theme to any book than demonstrating the value of a team? So thank you, Sam, for telling all of us what really happened. Sam didn't ask me to say this, but he recently came out with the book Hard Labor, which reveals the untold fight of the quote-unquote 14, a group of NBA players who fought for player rights, a book which provides context as to how NBA players these days make so much money. Smith reports on how superstars changed the game forever, players who were also denied cabs because they were black, oftentimes on team planes that were so bad that they sometimes crash-landed in fields. Hard Labor. You can get it now. So as always, I look forward to getting your feedback and insight. You can leave a message by calling us at 347-674-6980. That's 347-674-6980. 888-866-6980, or you can go to our website, jenkspod.com. That's jenkspod.com. Or you can always follow me on Twitter at Andrew Jenks. What Really Happened is produced by Dwayne Johnson, Danny Garcia, $7 Productions in association with Cadence 13 Studios. Did the man who led the free world in stopping Hitler and Nazism suffer from a profound sadness? And is it ultimately a historically inspirational story? Sir Winston Churchill is a beloved historical figure who has been depicted endlessly as the brilliant, opinionated, liquor and cigar-loving prime minister who had profound courage and foresight, in addition to many tragic and mortifying mistakes. He's also known to have a dark side, which he called his black dog. Lincoln, Darwin, Einstein, and other historical figures have been known to have mental health issues. But with recent deeper dives into Churchill's history and more insight into mental health, was Winston Churchill depressed? If so, did this lead one of the most inspirational war efforts in the history of mankind?